Welcome, everybody, to the Bassfug Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, David, a.k.a. Shady Gravano, a.k.a. Shady Monk. How are you today, David?
How's it going? I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
This interview wasn't supposed to happen, but we made it happen. So it's beautiful. I'm very excited.
Yes.
So you're coming from Philadelphia. That is, I think we interviewed one of your collaborators, Telyscopes, the other day. Is that true?
Oh wow, you know what? This is news to me, but that's very true. I was actually just speaking to Telescopes earlier today, a few hours ago.
Can you talk about the collaborations?
Well, I can go real deep into that.
Do it.
So Telescopes is the project of Jack Hubble. He and I have known each other for a good half decade or so, maybe a little longer. And we met at a Tame Impala concert, and we're kind of like best friends ever since, just from meeting random at this concert. And then we found out we both made music.
Wait. I have to stop you. How did you meet at the concert? You just walked up to him and was like, hey,
no.
You look cool.
Well, if we're being honest, it was one of those situations where we're kind of both like piled up towards the front as much as we can. There's probably a thick row of 5 to 10 people between us and the main stage. And then I just turned to my left, and the first person I see is him. And I smelled something funky, and he handed me the funky smelling object. And that was kind of the start of things. But yeah, in any case, I ended up moving, into a group house that was kind of like a very creative house in the suburbs here a few years back. And he ended up moving from Virginia to move in with me there. And we lived together for about a year and a half or so. And we both now live in Philadelphia, but in separate locations. We've had quite a few collaborative projects, and we have quite a few things on the horizon that we're trying to work on. I would definitely say, with respect to every other, musician I know, especially singer-songwriter, guitarists, and, people who are in live bands, he's kind of without a doubt like my epitome of like the Paul McCartney of our generation, in my opinion. He can kind of do everything as far as creating really rich and like moving songs, as well as just the whole, from top to bottom, what you need to do to produce an album and stitch things together and mix and master it all really good. And he has all the stuff that you need for recording and like his recording studio. So he's really quite professional, quite the underrated musician, in my opinion. So I think kind of in some ways, since we've linked up, I've been trying my best to introduce him to some of these more electronic and more experimental audiences, and people who are kind of just open to hearing strange and new things and just really good music at the end of the day, because that's what he makes. So it's like, it's hard for me not to imagine him taking off regardless of anything I do. But I just feel blessed to have him as a friend and collaborator at the end of the day.
I hope that in the future these two separate interviews become some type of thing of historical value, like a Paul and John type of thing, because you both are extremely talented songwriters. That was the thing that I noticed for both of you. You're not only are you prolific. Like I'm prolific in my own stuff that I've done, but a lot of it is just crap. Like I'll just export it and I'll throw it on the thing. But when I'm going through your discography, it's like you really, really, really are a talented songwriter. And it's kind of crazy.
I appreciate that.
It's kind of crazy that you and Jack kind of met. I'm kind of excited to see what you guys are gonna I guess collaborate on. Because not a lot of people have that privilege. Sometimes people just go solo their whole career, and they can't really find someone to vibe with. And it's kind of exciting that two very talented people kind of meet up.
I appreciate that. Everything you just said was very kind, and yeah, I on some levels I don't do it unaware of, I try to keep myself aware of my status in the landscape of things, and, the spectrum of content creators and people making stuff, and however, quote unquote prolific I might be or active. And I've definitely gotten that a lot from people as far as just like how much content I have out there. And I appreciate you saying that it's of good quality. But I definitely, I think, just in general, I've always had the nature and the advocacy for collaboration, and I've always sought, as much as I've enjoyed on a base level just making music for my own sanity and mental health sake, and because it's just fun and I love it. Making anything art with people in general is kind of just like the epitome of what I feel my meaning of life is. Kind of like I am happy as long as I'm able to create stuff with people, and I think that's why I've always just kind of, or why over the years I've naturally fell into this kind of place of fostering communities and trying to nurture other artists who I see potential in, and or who just seem very passionate about what it is that they want to do. And sometimes I'm just so, it's like the energy is infectious, and I just want to like see them blossom. So I try to do what I can, when I can, where I can, but at the same time, it's interesting because I'm balancing simultaneously, like, eventually I'd love to be able to live off of my music alone, or, my art alone. It'd be great to not have to have a day job and to be able to call myself like a full-time artist. And in a way I kind of am, because, to get into it, not to get too in it, but I'm actually at my job now. And my day job is working at a gas station, where I'm basically able to bring my laptop and work on music my whole shift. So it's been a godsend in some ways, allowing me to really just like galvanize my online presence, the amount of time I literally have to dish things out and get things done. And I think because I am able to kind of like separate it from my home life at times, even though I am pretty much working on music 24/7 there too, it helps me to kind of manage organizing like all the different things that I have my hands dipped in, because I kind of overwork myself. I'm kind of a workaholic. I need to learn how to say no to new ideas and projects sometimes, but I do my best, I guess, to kind of like octopus it, if that makes any sense.
I hear you. Yeah, and it's it's like the same with the podcast. Earlier we were talking about the person I have helping me find communicate with the talent and do the scheduling. It's hard to do everything by yourself. And when you're a workaholic, at some point your body just gives. It's like, I can't do everything. And at some point I need collaborators. I need people to help me, or else you won't be able to envision your dream. Right. And I think a lot of people forget about that. They look at guys like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whatever, and they think, oh, these are really great men. And whether they are or they aren't, that's another conversation. But one thing that they did was they replicated themselves with other people. So there's how many employees working at Microsoft? Like hundreds of thousands, maybe. I don't know. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to do everything themselves, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think that's one of the lessons that I've learned pretty happily. And I have noticed that like there seems to be some push and pull with other artists who it just either doesn't dawn on them, or even though the opportunity and possibility and capability might be presented to them, it seems like unappealing, maybe because they're just trying. A lot of it, I think, has to do with when you find an artist, what stage they're at in their career, and how realistic they are or knowledgeable they are about the landscape of the music industry, or just how things are online with streaming. And I think obviously a person's general personality always comes into it too. If a person's more inclined to being friendly and opening up to people, and that's where I've found I do feel like kind of a unique kind of, not like I'm one of a kind or anything. I'm sure there's plenty of people with this kind of, I guess, tenacity. But I've always felt like, not shy to ask for collaborations with people based off of difference of clout or any kind of discrepancies in that regard, like with just popularity or following. And I feel as though having that just general awareness of the fact that, I can make something and it's cool, but in these situations when and where I might have an idea that exceeds my capabilities, it's okay to, sift through the list of people that I know with all these amazing talents. And if someone comes to mind, especially naturally, and I have a close relationship with them, why not give it a go and see how it feels to allow them to, kind of take up the reins on that specific aspect of this thing that I'm trying to create. Because then at the end of the day, not only are they bringing their, raw talent that might, arguably be better than mine in that field, but they're also bringing a human element that I think, when people gel together, it kind of compounds in kind of like an exponential way, because there's like a heavier focus on that one thing, and maybe they're going to add like a flair of their personality to it that I could never have possibly thought of, and that ends up being something key to the end result. So I think a lot of it, the long story short of what I was just trying to say is ego is a big killer, I think, of creativity for a lot of people. And I think when people are able to let go of their ego and just be more open to the idea of seeing where things go, then you can create a lot of beautiful things. I think where a lot of people get caught up with that too is worrying that time is money in some ways, and that, whenever you take the time to invest in someone else's project or just to do something at all, that is in a way, a priority and a promise that you're making to as many people as you include in that project. And then there's an expectation set. And people don't like setting expectations with groups of people because that means they have to live up to something or, deliver something. It's a lot easier to not have to give anybody else expectations but yourself. So I think, a lot of it is personality based. A lot of it is maturity, but there's, so many different factors that come into play. And I think, like you said, with, Jack and Telyscopes and I meeting when we did and being able to collaborate, a lot of it also is just luck and sheer being in the right place at the right time and being open to those opportunities that are presented to you when they do present themselves.
Speaking of collaborations, you run you're collaborating with a lot of people, but one thing is you're running a label, and I think a lot of people they tend to think, well, it's 2020, you could put your own stuff on DistroKid or whatever, who needs a label? But I think people forget that the label is really doing a lot of stuff for you that you necessarily don't want to have to do yourself. That'll save you a lot of time. Promotion being one of the big ones. Can you talk about the label that you're running and how that's helping out the artists?
Sure. In the grand scheme of things, there is a lot to be said for, I guess, the difference between the level of a label that hyperpop is at right now currently versus something like, a Ghostly International or PC Music, something like that. We're not at a place, and, before I go any further, I should clarify, when I say we, I talk about it as a group because that feels more accurate to the community that I've built with hyperpop. And we started out as a collective with, more than just me as the founder. So when I took over in 2019, I've just kind of tried my best. At the time, I did my best to have the transition be as seamless as possible and to just kind of keep consistency. And then since then, I've been doing what I can to drive the direction of the music into a broader space, so it's not entirely as sharp to a specific sound. It's a little bit more open to other places that people might venture to, but still keeping generally with the pop catchy music necessity, I guess, and also something I wanted to kind of get into, and I will absolutely answer your question, but I'm going to meander to it.
Go for it.
Yeah, so something that has developed, I guess, over the past couple of years, especially in this past year that I've noticed, is this growing misunderstanding or kind of discrepancy between hyperpop, the label, and the greater genre term of hyperpop, which is kind of used for just about anything that people make that's electronic and poppy these days. At a point, it started kind of becoming like a thorn in my side. Not that it's like something that keeps me up at night, really, but there's been some minor discourse on Twitter and different online platforms that I've seen people kind of like having issues with hyperpop, the genre, or certain artists that are blowing up in that space or that are being labeled as such.
Could you explain hyperpop, the genre, before you go any further, just for the listeners that might not know what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. To my awareness, and if I could try to put it in a nutshell, hyperpop is basically, it's like an extreme of pop, or like it's like the over glamorized version in a way. It's like taking everything and punching it up to the next level, very hard, punchy, like percussion, and a lot of like experimental percussion with like sounds and clangs and things like that. There's a lot of emphasis on instrumentation and melody, and it kind of is in a way just the next stage of pop, and I would say the intersection of SoundCloud artists and like VGM producers kind of evolving and growing as they've just organically listened to music, and this is kind of the result of it. I feel like it's such a broad spectrum of music that you could call hyperpop, but as far as the specific sounds that the label that I run kind of, started off with and have been run under. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
No, that's fine. I was worried that my Discord screwed up again.
No,
you were talking about VGM producers sort of evolving. You were explaining what hyperpop was.
Yeah, as far as the label that I run goes, and what we've focused on putting out, we've had at first, and I might just open up a can of worms saying this. At first, we were trying to put out future bass, which was in and of itself this kind of like genreless description to put on anything that kind of had like a fusion of different genres, electronic with a certain kind of production style to it. And that was blowing up around 2016 when the friends that I founded the label with and I, got together. So that was what we were focused on kind of putting out. And at the time, it was blowing up pretty much in so many different places, but we were trying to just be that outlet that kind of like put out the best quality of it, like sought out like those really good tracks that would stick in your head and like you couldn't get out of your head for weeks or whatever it might be. And just being a producer and a content creator myself and having so many friends and collaborators, it was easy to kind of start a network and get a group of people to, start contributing. And that kind of just grew naturally over time. As far as like the stuff that we put out now, it's a lot more geared towards a lot of the vocal pop that like PC music people are putting out. And in general, it's a lot wider of a spectrum of what we accept, while it still, for the most part, needs to be electronic music, needs to have a pop quality to it. it's okay if it's kind of down tempo, or it's not as hard, or it's experimental, or it's like really just like avant-garde. It's like kind of at the end of the day, what it's come down to be completely honest, is where we used to have a 7-person deciding vote. Since there was an uneven amount of us, it kind of was perfect for that scenario. Once it got whittled down to just me running it, it's kind of just been up to my own standards. So I hope in that regard that I've just been kind of like, maintaining some semblance of consistency, because I know that my standards alone aren't necessarily the end all be all of what good music in this kind of genre is. It's kind of, a lot of it has to do with what gets submitted to the label. And so it's kind of been like a self-running, well-oiled machine at this point where, I know how to take care of the things I need to run it. And I am happily surprised on a pretty daily basis at an increasing level at the amount of people that, find the label and submit. The one thing I have noticed kind of an increase of, to go back to the hyperpop discrepancy, though, however, is that because there is this growing awareness of the term hyperpop that isn't, it's kind of like square's a rectangle, but a rectangle is not always a square. There's artists being platformed on, let's say, like the Spotify hyperpop playlist, like curated by A.G. Cook, that have literally nothing to do with the label that I'm running. And while I absolutely love all that music, and I'm so stoked, especially for any friends that happen to, get noticed by that crowd of people, it's kind of disheartening sometimes to feel as though all the effort that we're putting into our end of things has been overshadowed by like these other artists that kind of, no, I don't want to say they hijacked the term in any way, shape, or form, because we didn't necessarily like birth it. Like, it's two pretty common words that we put together, and we thought it was just a good fit for the label. But
it's like Avril Lavigne calling herself punk.
Yeah, it's like we didn't foresee, this growth of the term in any way, shape, or form. And I can't speak to what our significance in or like what role we played in helping it grow was. Yeah. But I'm sure, there's a percentage at the end of the day. So I've been working on ways to help differentiate that and give fans and submitters alike an ability to understand what the label and community is versus this, general genre term. And I'm happy with, where things are right now as far as the labels going. But as this is what I meant to get back to, is your question as far as what is this label doing for artists?
Yeah.
Feel free to completely edit so much of that out.
I'll leave it in. Well, here, there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on here, like, because you're talking about like genres, and one thing I noticed is you've done some chiptune, I guess,
Sure.
you could call it, and that was another genre that kind of morphed from the early 2000s to the 2010. What is like 8-bit, fake bit? Oh, you're using VSTs, you aren't using a Commodore 64. It seems like every genre ends up having some type of circle of life. It's created, it's sort of this DIY thing, more people get involved, the committees are born, then like other people kind of get in, they don't have the same sort of appreciation for it kind of dwindles, the original people leave, and then it kind of morphs into something else and takes a life of its own. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something that I think happens in genres from what I understand. But I wanted to ask about there's a few things I got from that. Genre popularity. Let's talk about the genres and hopping on genres for the sake of your own gain and getting clout as an artist. Can you touch on that? Because you were talking about that, And I don't want the people on the hyperpop Spotify playlist coming at me and getting pissed off at my podcast or whatever. I'm being unbiased. I'm just interviewing you, you know. But like,
sure.
do you find there's some people out there that they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do Latin jazz this week because it's really popular, and then the next week they're like, oh, I'm gonna do gent metal because it's popular. Do you see that a lot?
I don't know if it's because I don't necessarily seek out that kind of personality so much, but personally, while I do understand that kind of personality type, and I've definitely seen that in some aspects, throughout my time being online, I'd say I'm happily surprised that it's not as bad as I would think. There's definitely some people out there who are just in it for the gain, just in it for the follows, just in it for the clout. And I think it's really easy to tell right off the bat who those people are, just based off of how they interact, or what their first message to a given person might be, or what what the things that they talk about might be, or how they operate themselves online. And it's without throwing shade, pun intended, on anybody. There's I think there's a valid path or a valid point to be made by operating in that way. I don't personally respect it as much, and I don't operate that way. I feel as though, to be clear, I would never discourage anybody from trying a new sound or experimenting or pushing, to see if they could create something with some given parameters, that might not be what they were into, or something like that. I think there's a misconception to a degree that people feel like they have to carve out this like nook of sound that is their own, and that is the only thing that they can make. And if they venture outside of that, it's like committing a crime. I don't know. Then, at the same time, I can very much from experience say that I've been at this for, 10 years, and I've been all over the place with my sound. And it's not until just this year that I've started producing for other people and trying, with a focused intent to create a more concise sound with these people that I'm producing for, that I've had any kind of success being playlisted or anything like that. And in a way, it's like bittersweet because it's through these other artists. But I know at the end of the day that it was my work that was put into that song that got playlisted or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's interesting because I've noticed that without and I don't feel any kind of way about it. It's just something that I've been able to just observe over the years. It seems
there's something.
Go ahead.
Sorry, there was something you were talking about. I'm starting to notice a kind of a pattern here. In not to steer the conversation, still going in the same direction, but I notice, especially on your newest album, there was one song that I saw a bit of. I'll just come out and say it. There's a lot of Nine Inch Nails influence here and there. I noticed one song, "Shadows of Clouds on Mountains." It sounded like the Nine Inch Nails Still kind of soundtrack, and I'm not trying to compare you to other people, but I kind of got that vibe, and I see it in other places. I'm not going to make a list here, but then I see you're an artist, you're also doing visual arts, you're running labels, and now you're producing for other people. Is there a Trent Reznor kind of fascination going on there that's kind of penetrating your subconscious, or am I onto something here?
Did you research, or is this literally just out of your
No, I honestly, I fucking research. People say, "Oh, you're a good interviewer." It's like, no, you gotta fucking listen to their discography 5 times if you haven't already.
You definitely did your research, and you hit the nail on the head there with Shadows of Clouds. If I can make one correction. Unfortunately, based off of just the way I distributed the music, that album's actually quite old. I made that about 5-6 years ago.
Oh, sorry, it was Spotify.
Maybe longer. No, yeah, it's totally not your fault. But that said, it is the most recent album listed on my page, so that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out. It's definitely, given that fact, I would say at the time, around 6 years ago especially, was prior to me finding these labels and groups, and I was much more like deep in the experimentation of finding my own sound and kind of putting together the influences of the few major influences that I had at the time, which definitely, you hit it on the head there. Trent Reznor is kind of my coup de grace of like the people that I look up to, the person that I feel like I aspire to reflect similar traits in my own work. I don't want to be a copycat, and I definitely don't feel as though that the bulk of my work has reflected that Nine Inch Nails influence. So in some ways, I'm definitely trying to make a conscious effort to fix that. But yeah, I think that
because he ran his own record label. He had Nothing Records, and then another one, I think. And
yes.
you have a similar progression. It seems like he's somewhat of a mentor to you.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that in a way, if I had to pick like 3-4 mentors that kind of brought me to the point that I was at when I started to think about running a label and being a part of groups, it would have been Nine Inch Nails, Boards of Canada, Daft Punk, maybe a little bit of, who was it? Gosh, I just had it.
Tool?
I enjoy Tool, but they're actually not like huge on my list of influence. Surprisingly, considering I did a Schism remix like years ago.
And you were doing a lot of Boards of Canada remixes too, I think.
Yeah, to the point where just this year I ended up putting out those remixes from the past decade or so on a compilation, because it got, I appreciate them, and I feel as though they kind of allow me to flex a different muscle. Something that I think a lot of electronic musicians and just musicians in general, whether you're going to, go for releasing the music or not, there's something really enjoyable about reworking and remixing tracks. And I think, on a personal level for me, especially when I'm in my creative zone, but I get in a snag or I just feel like I'm kind of burnt out on a track and I don't really feel like putting myself under the same kind of scrutiny or creative pressure, it can feel really alleviating to take pieces of someone else's work and try and think of like different ways that inspires you and kind of just have fun with it. And so for me, Boards of Canada was not only, such an influence. I would say that they were kind of like teachers in a way. Even in a lot of ways, I guess just because of the kind of producer I am, I've studied the people that I listen to, in when they do something musically, it sticks out to me. I notice it, and then I think to myself, how can I replicate that effect without repeating it or taking it completely, or how can I make it my own in some way? And some of doing that and getting familiar with that is kind of learning how they did it. And sometimes I would try to completely recreate a track from scratch.
It's a Yamaha A3000.
Yeah.
That's the sampler they used.
On that note, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually just had a person comment on my YouTube channel like a few weeks ago about one of my Boards of Canada remixes or covers there, more accurately. They were saying something to the effect of like, oh, this isn't in the right key or something like that. And like, oh, and they used this synth, and wow. It just got me thinking, like there's so many different kind of understandings, I guess, of what something is, and a person's context and their point of reference can be completely different, and you can't expect that everybody's going to think this way. But just if I can for the few people or however many people of the world are going to hear this specific podcast, I'd love to try and shed some light on my take on that, which is just that when you cover something, especially, intent is really the biggest factor, I think, at the end of the day. Because if a person's intending to go for a cover that sounds like the original, then that's you can be scrutinizing to them if they make a point to mention that, or if it seems like obvious that that's what they were intending to do. But I think when a person kind of clearly is using a different set of instruments, or they change the key of something, that's just as much of a valid cover as long as it's recognizable as the source material. But anyway,
I think people they have like weird emotional validations that they need to have, and I think it's a lot easier for people to try to tear people down than it is to build them up. And we all know this because we all have been on the internet, and we know that comment. We've all gotten that comment, And at the end of the day, I've owned a Yamaha A3000 just by sheer luck. I got for like $75 on Craigslist, and
nice.
the thing fucking sucks. It's like a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the ass to program, and you play with it and you go, okay, I understand what they were doing, but like you could do that with the built-in Ableton plugins or FL Studio or whatever you use, MTV Music Generator. I'm sure you could probably figure out how to sound like Boards of Canada. That mentality, it just prevents people from creating, and that's never good.
And on that topic, just to shed some light on my process a little bit, it's, I think, important to note that
that's what I wanted to ask what you had, what were you using for gear, but also I think you had in 2019 last year, I think your gear was stolen or something. Did you want to talk about what you have for gear, what happened there, and what your process is?
Yeah, I can't say that my process has changed too much since that fateful event. I guess to start off, I'll say I've been an Ableton Live producer since 2008, when my oldest brother James introduced me to the program. I think at the time Live 7 was the version that was out, and so I've kind of like grown up with this DAW a little bit in a lot of ways, and I kind of, once I got comfortable with it, it just kind of became secondary to me. It's always been there. It's kind of just like the thing that makes sense. It just the shoe fit, so to speak. I've dabbled in FL Studio a little bit, and I've enjoyed it occasionally. And I've tried a few other things throughout the years, or just through especially my collaborations with people. I've always sought to not have the DAW be any reason to not collaborate, or a difference of DAWs. So that's always been something that I've pushed for, especially, if me and a friend have different DAWs, we make it work.
How do you make it work? What do? You just render out the stems, or what's a good tip there?
Yeah, I guess for anybody trying to go that direction, there's always a way if you're willing to compromise certain expectations. So the way, for instance, that my friend Stan from New Jersey and I did it, we created an entire Boards of Canada like tribute project that I don't know if you happen to scope that out, but it's called Dreamland Circus, and that was a pretty hefty undertaking that we had. We were both heavy in our Boards of Canada inspired vibes at that time, and so we were kind of just inadvertently creating this material on the side, and realized, like, why don't we just put our heads together and make this into something? I don't think anybody is gonna, not appreciate it. If we do a good job, then they'll just kind of respect it, maybe, or will feel better about being able to have been able to kind of inhabit this space and bring some new sound to that realm that people already enjoy. And in some ways, it definitely was kind of like taking a large bite off of their sound, and that was the intent. So it wasn't something that we were ever kind of like going to be upset at if someone were like, this sounds too much like Boards of Canada. If anything, that would have been a compliment to us.
What were the two DAWs that you guys were using?
So as I said, I've been in Ableton, and then my friend was using Fruity Loops, FL Studio.
Yeah, and so did you just render out the waves to each other, or how did that work?
So a little bit of it was establishing right off the bat whether it was conscious or not. We kind of both realized our roles a bit, and I, kind of being more melodic based and chord based and composition based, and him being very technical based and really into the hardware, and especially the ability to like digitally replicate whatever physical hardware like artifacts and things like that were going on in their recordings. He was very good at that. He had a scrutiny for it that I definitely didn't have. So at a point, we kind of just realized our roles and fell into them. And then I would kind of come up with a concept, maybe, with a specific kind of synth in mind, and I would send him that. And we would either affect the exported stem, or I would send him the MIDI, and then he would kind of put that through an instrument that he felt fit. So there was a lot of back and forth. Some songs on the album are entirely by him, some are basically entirely by me, and then some are very 50-50, like from the bottom up.
That's cool. So right now you're using Ableton Live. Do you have any outboard gear? Do you have any like synths or anything? Or
So to go back to your whole question, currently and pretty much always, I've been very digital. And for the longest time, that's been kind of like, I guess it's kind of just the nature of how I operate. But in some ways, it's something that I want to try to consciously get out of. I did buy a Korg MS-20 Mini, I think it was, when I was, it was like 5 years ago or so. And then I didn't use it for the longest time, and I ended up selling it to my friend Zach, who also lived in that same house with Telyscopes and I. Oh, wow. And he also, just to fill in some blanks there, I introduced him to Ableton, and he's now producing under the name Suleiman. And Suleiman, I think is how you pronounce it. And he's like really good at hardware stuff as well, and does techno and glitch kind of music. And just a shout out to him, because I feel as though he's come a really long way in the past few years since he started learning that program. But I sold my MS-20 to him, and he and I ended up playing like an ambient synth show together, impromptu at one point, that was like thrown together last minute.
When shows were a thing.
Yeah, right. But for the most part, I've been lackluster with my hardware, and I've been trying to amend that. I had for the longest time, I had an electric bass. That's kind of my secondary instrument if I had to pick one, whereas piano, keyboard is the first instrument that I learned and what I grew up playing. And then the use of Ableton definitely, kind of urged me to get some external gear. So prior to the theft of my gear last year, I had like a mini AP. I think it's an MPK. MPK Mini has like maybe 14 to 16 keys, and then a little knob and some buttons. And then there was a launch pad that I had, and some other kind of Korg I think it was the Nano pad, which had like an XY axis pad on it. All these things were cool, but for the most part, I really only ever used the MPK. And, so through that, I realized kind of, and this is something I think that naturally happens with any artist, is like you get gear and you get excited about it, but then sometimes you realize, you're not using it, or it's just not really part of your creative process and it's not worth having. Or, maybe it is worth having, but it's just not going to be fruitful for you to use.
This is a personal attack on me right now, by the way.
No, this is a personal attack on me. Yeah. And I in some ways am comforted by the fact that you can relate. But sorry, also. It's like I wanted to. So I wanted to narrow myself down. In a lot of ways, I tried to look for the silver linings as much as I could when my stuff got stolen, and try to see things from like clean slate. Where do I start? What am I going to do first? And how do I operate now kind of thing. I was encouraged by a lot of friends to do a GoFundMe, and then simultaneously, one of my buddies, one of the founders from Hyperpop, I won't disclose details at the moment, but he pretty much outright bought my laptop that I'm currently using, and it was just one of those things where I couldn't have asked for that, and I definitely feel in some ways guilty, like for losing my stuff, or having it get stolen or whatever, because I feel as though all these things happened after the fact that I could have saved people money or something. I don't know, but at the end of the day, I think having been in situations similar with other friends of mine who lost stuff and trying to help people out, I think it just goes back to the community aspect. I think when people really put themselves out there and they have people that care for them and we're all looking out for each other, shit happens, and it's really tough to watch somebody else go through something that you would just be devastated to go through yourself. So I'm only blessed to have the group of friends and the support that I do.
That's rough. Every producer listening to this is clutching to their favorite sequencer right now, and they're
back your shit up is my biggest lesson. I have only that to say is back your shit up, because I was very fortunate and lucky, might be the better word, to have uploaded the Hyperkart Racer album pretty much in its entirety as private demos to my SoundCloud. Had I not done that, I wouldn't have been able to release that album. And simultaneously, I was in the midst of doing the Weekly Beats project, which was basically, from the start of 2019 to the end of the year, every week I tried to make a new track. Well, it was kind of tough to do that when for 2 to 3 weeks I had nothing. And that was also kind of saved by the fact that I had kind of stockpiled a couple, I maybe made a couple beats one week, and so I would just reserve it for the next week or what have you.
Yeah.
So it was interesting also to see, because that was kind of like a sound journal. It was interesting to see how that event affected the music from that point forward, since during that time those beats were in so many ways kind of like a snapshot of how I was feeling on a given week. And there was quite a lot of other tumultuous emotional stuff happening around that time, unfortunately, but we don't have to get into that. But in general, it was just a very pivotal moment of my life that I'm in retrospect, I don't want to say I'm glad happened. I definitely still think about some of the stuff that was stolen and wish that I had it. There was at least something like a decade's worth of music on that computer and the hard drive that was taken out of the the backpack. I had an external, and some of the stuff was backed up, but they were both in that backpack that was taken. So
and it feels so weird. It's just so violating. Ugh, someone stole my shit. Ugh, it's fucking gross.
Yeah. I had a lot of that. I had a lot of especially already given my nature as a producer who kind of goes under an alias and wears a mask. I was I'm gonna be a vigilante. I'm gonna scout out where my stuff was stolen and superhero style try to get these people, and that isn't how real life works, unfortunately. But
there's actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. There's a really good DEF CON talk. It's like a cybersecurity conference where someone stole a guy's computer, but he had VNC installed, and he ended up getting his computer back by remoting into the criminals using his computer. It's really funny. I suggest anyone to check that out on YouTube.
Nice.
Yeah, I think if you just type in "a hacker gets his computer back," you'll find it's super great. It's really funny.
That's validating, at least.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Can we talk about how you write music? Were you taught how to write music, or how did you learn how to write music? Because like I said earlier on in the program, you're a very talented songwriter, and I'm curious how that came to be. Did you teach yourself growing up? Did you take like piano lessons or something? Did your parents like make you go to school band, or how did that all come to be?
Okay, so I think the short answer is that I taught myself pretty much, which I feel like sounds like, I don't know, pompous to say, but in yeah, basically when I was a wee lad, my parents were never discouraging of any kind of artistic, expression that I showed, and I was always drawing from a young age, so I exhibited that talent, and they kind of thought that I was going to be like an architect or an artist or something. And simultaneously, I was always humming and whistling and tapping on my desk at school and all these other things. So they knew I was musical also. And so my mom had a upright piano in our house that I'm pretty sure was there from the time I was born. Like I don't remember a time where it wasn't there. So pretty much as soon as I could touch a piano, I was playing it. I wasn't necessarily playing it good, but I think probably at a younger age, better than some people were. And I felt as though I didn't really need to take lessons. I remember thinking like, oh, I don't want to take lessons. It seems like so pointless because I can already hear everything and I can just play it how I hear it. Why do I need to take lessons? And then
lessons seem so strict, like
it's just like it's very much about repetition and muscle memory and discipline. And for sure, I lacked all of those things, and I still do to this day in some ways. As much as I, would say again that piano is my first instrument and that I play by ear, I don't play nearly enough, and I definitely make mistakes a lot of the time when I play. But to go back to your question, so for the longest time, I'd say again until about 2008, I was mainly just playing piano. I picked up the bass, and I was kind of trying to learn that as well because my late uncle John, had been a bass player, and so I was really into that. And I kind of gravitated to 4 strings max. Anything more than that was way too complicated, and I didn't like doing chords. So it was just teaching myself whatever instrument that I could hold at the time, but in a kind of rudimentary way. I would say, someone classically trained, so to speak, or someone trained to any degree in like music theory or just being able to know what notes and chords and stuff are, would probably say that my understanding in some ways is basic, but I think my my understanding exceeds my physical capabilities. So it's a lot of it is like stuff that just kind of makes sense to me and that I get. So I exhibit in my music in a way where it's like, nobody told me what this aspect of something was. I just kind of caught on to it as I was listening to a certain song or, a grouping of songs, and then thought, oh, I like that aspect. What's this? Maybe it's swing. The first time I heard swing or something like that, and I'm like, oh, swing is cool. How do I incorporate swing into my music? And I remember being fixated on things like that. When I would kind of stumble on a new thing that felt cool to try, it would kind of reappear in different ways in so many songs at that time that I was exploring it. So in that aspect, I would say going back to the gear thing, I've always been a very digital producer. I've always used basically my DAW and external VSTs that I might download from friends and websites that I find. A lot of the time, I would come up with a basic idea of a melody or chord progression or something to that extent on the piano, and then I'll, instead of recording it and trying to produce around it, what might be a surprise to a lot of people is that for the most part, I basically manually input everything in the DAW. So whereas there are some exceptions to that, for the most part, I'm manually inputting all the notes and the information necessary to make it feel as though a human's playing it. And in a way, that's actually become easier for me because of just how long I've been doing that way of things than it is for me to practice day in and day out and get like the best cut of me playing it and then use that recording. But in saying that, it's grown into kind of like a thing that I want to eventually accomplish and get. It's like a hump that I want to get over, because I think there will come a time when I'll be much more inclined and interested in, potentially like hiring a band or getting a group of people together to play a selection of my music live. And in that situation, it's going to be painfully clear to me how like musically illiterate I am versus people who actually play it live. And I know that, there's so many things that I do know based off of how long I've been producing music, and there's things that I understand about the production process with a DAW. But there's certain things that if someone, were to just kind of shout out in the midst of a jam to have me like switch to a minor somethingth or whatever it might be, I'd be like, just play it and I'll do it. If I hear you say it, like I haven't committed that information to memory yet, so it can create a disconnect with some collaborative processes. I think, I'm at a point where we can get around that for the most part. Anybody who's able to kind of direct me with something, I can usually kind of show them where my head's at, and then we can go from there. But in the going back to what you said about, I guess, how I produce music and how I've learned, I had a brief stint of attempted lessons around the age of like 15, maybe 16. And then that quickly dissipated. It was like I'd always been playing by ear up until that point. I learned a few things from those lessons, but it really wasn't significant. And then I continued to play by ear and not take lessons because I was just a stubborn kid and it didn't seem like worth my time or whatever it might have been. No, I regret that now. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I wish I could go back and do differently.
I think you did pretty good for not taking lessons, and I think a lot of times,
appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, it's not for or against lessons or whatever. I think people just find their way to what it is that they want to do and what they want to emulate. I think a lot of creation is just trying to express yourself and mirroring other people that created stuff, albums, whatever, art that were just them trying to express themselves as well. So I think at the end of the day, whether or not you could sell out Carnegie Hall because you're really good at piano, or you taught yourself how to use a vocoder on YouTube, I think it's all good so long as you're able to express yourself the way you want to express yourself, I think.
I agree. And yeah, definitely touching back on that, there's to reiterate, like, I think my lessons, so to speak, at the end of the day were the people I were listening to.
Yeah.
And specifically like Trent Reznor and Daft Punk and that kind of influence just kind of bled through and tinted everything that I worked on. There's very few, I don't want to say few, but there's still an aching desire in me to kind of like really hunker down in a cabin for like weeks and somehow like craft some new sound that hasn't existed before and create an entire album out of it. But at the end of the day, one thing that I do think is a significant aspect of my production style is that I can be pretty easy to please, which I think is rare with a lot of producers that put music out at the rate that I do, or that like making music as much as I do, or whatever, have goals of being more prolific or making a career out of it. I do think that one of my biggest obstacles is to try and get a little bit more hard on myself about, I guess, like crafting an original sound, because I feel like I'm good at accumulating something that sounds good by creating a bunch of different pieces that on their own don't necessarily sound too original, but that together form like a catchy, fun thing. But I think I definitely would be like best suited to improving as a musician if I were to focus on that kind of like craft of the sounds themselves. Like sound design is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Sound design is my biggest my biggest goal to improve on.
Do you think that working with other artists is a chance to do that? Because I think you were telling me you were producing some other artists. Do you find that if you're producing another artist, maybe you're exploring a different genre or a different sound, and that gives you the opportunity to do that sound design you crave?
Yeah, I think so. In a lot of ways, some of that sound design experimentation is going to come from my own, just working out of my own volition, not for anybody. But when it does come to these productions for other artists, especially lately, there's a much more, we're discussing a vision that they have, and we're keeping, some semblance of a playlist usually in mind that we can share with each other, where we can kind of reference and cross-reference that and use it to kind of just push us in the direction that we want to stay on the same page on with. As far as like trying new things, yeah, I think it kind of something about producing for other people. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about intent.
Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. Let's talk about these artists that you've been producing.
Sure. So just in general, I would say like the intent behind producing for these other artists is much different than my intent has been as just a general producer, content creator up to this time. I do want to make a living off of this. This is what I do. It's what I'm passionate about. And I would love to have some, semblance of pride in knowing that like I made some kind of mark on the music industry or community that I flourished in, or whatever it might be. And that kind of has driven everything that I've done up to that point. But now I'm at this point where I'd rather take I'd rather take a back seat to, seeking out the limelight, so to speak. And I'd rather use the tools, the knowledge, and the kind of like platforms that I have at my disposal to work on something that feels fresh, new, more focused, and that has potentially a better chance of being lucrative, if I could dare say it. But so, yeah, I mean, without going so I'm not seeking clout. I'm not seeking plays.
I think we understand. We obviously musicians, we all want to make it big, and some of us don't give a shit, and they're Scrooge McDuck or Mr. Burns, and they just want the groupies and the money and the drugs and all that. But I think for the majority of us, we just want our artwork to be recognized and to get that validation, and hopefully be able to just focus on that instead of having to participate in all the other aspects of life to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. So
do you think that kind of kills the dream, though? Do you think maybe if you didn't have a day job, it would affect your music?
Yeah, to some degree, I think about that a lot. I guess I wish I had some time to myself to find out for myself. I guess one of my biggest, in some ways, would we all be seeking this oasis, this perfect dream of like living on a cushion of our success, if we didn't have the day-to-day to bring us down? I don't know. I think personally I've seen a lot of people who do what they do because it's what they love to do, and whether they're successful or not, it doesn't really change the fact that they're going to do it. And I think that's the kind of person I am. I love making music, and I love collaborating with people, and I love, cultivating creative communities. And I think regardless of how, monetarily successful I am off of that, since I haven't been up to this point, really, it's not the reason I've been doing any of what I've been doing up to this point. It's only at this point now that I'm thinking to myself, I'm getting older. I love doing this. It takes up pretty much all my time. I should find ways to make it worth that time. And I don't think that that's something that's, being a sellout to do. It's just about being smart and knowing how to market, I guess, different things and being aware of that market. And so I think, being aware of a market of what's popular and what's going to be successful isn't necessarily selling out. It's just having your finger on the pulse of what's happening right now.
If you changed your name to Lil Shay and started doing music for Nike commercials or something, maybe that's selling out. But we know
we'd have to revisit this conversation at that point. But I think for now, I can say with some pretty great consistency that hasn't been my MO. Yeah. But yeah, I think just in general. Give me one moment. So sorry.
Yeah.
So where was I? Just yeah. Okay, so I'll try to be quick about it. So just in this year specifically, I definitely felt a shift of what it was that I wanted to focus on and how I wanted to operate. And I guess some of it, like we talked about before with like meeting Telyscopes at a Tame Impala concert, like I couldn't have planned for that. But certain things kind of fall in your lap, and you just try to stay open to opportunities and see where things land and stick sometimes. So in that regard, being a label runner, it hasn't been my goal up to this point, but I didn't realize that in a way I was kind of like operating this net that's just like catching talent. And sometimes it became like apparent to me that the quality of music was just increasing. And I mean quality, not quantity. Like the quality of people's submissions has definitely gotten better over the years. And specifically this year, I just noticed like a huge increase of UK artists and people that were really impressing me. To name a few, this wonderful vocalist, Alfie, who I've begun executive producing for amidst the pandemic. She and I have already crafted, upwards of an album's worth of material and then some, and have some collaborations with some really prolific people who are active and growing, and some things on the way. And it's like been like a night and day contrast as far as the fan activity and like the engagement of people listening to the material since I've kind of like dedicated time to this project versus whatever the Shady Monk spectrum of things was. And so in that realm, it's like, because of that, it's easy for me to kind of feel as though I'm putting my chips in the right place right now. I feel like super inspired. The two of us work very, very well together, and like kind of like freakishly well together, where she'll give me like an acapella of a rough idea and we'll have like basically a track by the end of the day. And like a good one, not just like a rough idea. It's like usually like really catchy and it's kind of uncanny. So it's to the point where it's like, okay, this person and I are working together and we're making some good material, and it doesn't seem like that momentum is going to stop. So I want to take this seriously. And, on a similar note, other artists like Laurenti, Vumsy, a lot of people with eyes at the end of their name, just completely by happenstance. But they're all very talented vocalists in their own right that kind of come with different flavors and vibes. Elfie wants to kind of keep in this kind of future pop, pushing the boundaries of what people expect from like the PC music hyperpop stuff, and kind of keep it more dark and moody and serious. Vumsy's kind of like more inspired by like radio pop, very friendly pop music, and so that's kind of like a big departure, I guess, in some ways from the production styles of things that I've put out in the past. And then Laurenti is more going towards like a synth pop 80s kind of vibe. So all of these different, and this is just to name a few. There's a lot of different projects and people that I've been working with in different capacities throughout this past year that in similar ways, for one reason or another, they bring something to the table or they're requesting something to be expressed with this sound that they're trying to craft. And that kind of informs the decisions that I make as a producer and what we end up kind of cooking up as a result. So I think your question more or less was like, how do
I was asking about, because you were talking about wanting you were exploring certain sound creation, and I was kind of pivoting that into the other artists that you're producing, going back to that Trent Reznor thing, running a label and then producing other people. And so I just wanted you to touch on the other people you were producing and how that's an outlet for you to explore different styles. And it sounds like it's working out for you, and it sounds like you're able to sort of explore the different styles that you weren't necessarily exploring in your other projects.
Yeah, it gives me an incentive to test out some things, and in that kind of process of sending things, bouncing things back and forth between the artists, we are able to kind of chip away at this. We kind of come with like, it's like they're telling me like, oh, I want to make this out of purple putty. So I bring the purple putty and then we like, chip it away until it becomes something that looks like something cool. I don't know if that was a good analogy at all.
No. It's good. It's good. It gives the listeners an insight on that process. David, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. We've gone over the interview time, so I don't know what else to say because you've been so gracious and you're such a talented songwriter. I'm happy that we're able to get all this out of you. Where can people reach you online?
Well, I appreciate everything, and this has been so wonderful. You guys can reach me at Linktree. It's linktr.ee/Shady Monk, no space. And that basically has like the major links to any significant platforms that I operate on. If you want to check out Hyperpop, the label that I run, it's the same thing, linktr.ee/Hyperpop. And then also, we never really touched on it, but there's a secondary label I run called Monastery. That's more like dark techno glitchy vibes, and it's growing as we speak. And we have something coming out on that label tomorrow, which is a various artists techno compilation, which I'm very excited about. Oh, well, I don't know if tomorrow is going to be when this podcast takes place.
No, this is going to be 2021 when we release this, yeah.
So I'll say, let me rephrase, we just recently released a techno compilation on that label, and I'm very excited about that.
What's the link to that label? We'll put it in the show notes if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. That link is linktr.ee/Monastery Records.
Okay, sick. Cool. Well, if you remember anything else, let us know, and we'll put it in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to say before we go?
Just super thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. An amazing pleasure. Yeah,
like I said, you're a very talented individual, and those are the types of people I like to interview.
Thank you so much. Seriously.
Yeah, no problem.
You're very kind.
Yeah. Well, have a good rest of your night.
You as well, and I hope that we can do something again like this sometime.
We'll definitely do a part 2. Maybe we could do. I want to do a duos in the future. Maybe we could do a duo with you and Telyscopes.
That'd be awesome. I'll be sure to send along that info to them and let them know that you're interested.
Excellent. Take care, David.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
That was another episode of the Bassfug Podcast. Totally appreciate that you're listening to this. Hope you're checking out the other ones. You don't want to miss any of the juicy information and cool stories that our guests seem to bring to the table. I'm serious, though. We have some of the best guests. I don't know how I get them. But you're going to want to go check those out. Make sure you're subscribed, because you'll miss all these great stories and music production tips. Check us out at www.bassfug.com. There's links to all of our social media, where the podcast is located, Apple Music, Spotify, you name it. Just go to www.bassfug.com bassfug.com. And thanks for everybody who's been liking and subscribing and commenting so far. It really means a lot. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
This program was brought to you by the superwill64.com Entertainment Network. For more great shows, podcasts, and music, please visit superwill64.com.